The book of Exodus was written by Moses sometime between 1440 and 1400 BC. The story follows Israel's time in Egypt and their journey to the Promised Land. Exodus picks up 400 years after Genesis, where Abraham's family has grown into a people now called Israel, living as slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh. In the midst of a decree to wipe out the Jewish people altogether, we're introduced to Moses. God appoints him as leader of the Israelites, the one to lead them out of bondage. God sends a series of 10 plagues over Egypt as divine justice against Pharaoh, and even after allowing the Israelites to leave, Pharaoh sends an army to capture the Israelites. God miraculously parts the sea for Israel, delivering his people. From here, the Israelites begin to wander in the wilderness. They quickly forget their deliverance from their oppressors and complain against God, yet God responds with mercy and provision. The people encamp at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God invites Israel into a new covenant with him to establish a standard of living for the people. Through obeying these laws, Israel will become a nation set apart to represent God to the world as promised to Abraham. God extends this incredible access to himself, but Israel ignores God, choosing their own path. In Exodus, we see God's miraculous efforts to free the Israelites from hunger, slavery, their own wandering, and ultimate genocide. However, God is faithful to his promises, even when Israel rebels again and again.
As we prepare to go into this service, just want to make sure that you are aware, and maybe you missed the information that came out earlier, but we'll be taking communion at the end of the service. So take a moment in the next few moments and gather the supplies you will need, whatever type of bread you want to use and whatever type of juice you would like to use, the beverage to use to take communion together as we head into the service. One of the challenges that we are all facing in this pandemic has been how to know what is truth. How to know what is truth. I mean, who are we going to listen to? Who are we going to take as their information? Who are we going to believe? Is it going to be the World Health Organization? Is it going to be the health department? Is it going to be the CDC? Are we going to listen to doctors and any doctors? Is it going to be government officials when they come on the TV? I mean, maybe it's your biology from middle school, your biology teacher from middle school, that they've reached out to you on social media to tell you what is true. I mean, there are so many experts making all kinds of bold statements. And then there are the conspiracy theories. There are these theories that mask, no mask, mask. Maybe some of you've even had friends. Maybe you've had friends that have called you sheeple, being called a communist, or being called soft. And usually, they're being called these names by the person in high school you wouldn't even have cheated off of in math class. Somewhere in the middle of all these bold statements lies the truth. But once again, you and I are kind of stuck in this moment where the people that we are trying to understand and believe are trying to share information with us, but we lack trust. I mean, trust is the basis of all information. Trust is the basis of all of our relationships and how we go forward, and how are we going to take it, and how are we going to believe it, how are we going to pertain it to our lives. Hey, let's just take a few moments now, either at home or your work or wherever you're at, and if you've got someone to discuss these questions with, great. If you need to get into the chat room and talk with one of our hosts in the online campus, do that as well. But how do we determine who we're going to trust with information that's being shared with us? And what made you feel comfortable in trusting their opinion? Now take a moment and discuss that amongst yourselves. See, Forbes magazine did an interview with Stephen Covey, and if you've read any of the Stephen Covey books and information, it's really pretty good. But a quote from the article said this: "Trust is the operating system of every relationship." And Covey goes on to talk about the change that happens in our organizations happen at the speed of trust. If you can't trust someone, then it makes it really difficult to make any significant changes within an organization. When trust is high and when you have deep belief in somebody as a leader and your trust is high, then changes can come quickly because you believe in that person so much, you will do what they say. But when trust is low, changes take a lot more time. You can expect more setbacks. And if you think about that in your own life, in your relationships, when you first started dating someone or when you became friends with somebody down the street, you had to build up that rapport to trust them than to believe them. This same type of trust is the issue that we are facing in this story in the Exodus. That God is looking to transform the Israelites. He's looking to change them from the inside out. And trust is low. The Israelites do not trust God. Therefore, change is slow. When trust is low, change is slow. And the new rhythms and rituals are really hard. The new rhythms of what God is trying to teach the people is taking more time than maybe they were comfortable with. The Israelites, they had witnessed the crossing of the Red Sea. They had witnessed how Moses stretched out his arms and the sea had parted and the ground was dry. They had witnessed the destruction of Pharaoh's army, how the sea crashed in on top of them. Maybe if they could stop for a minute, they could reach back and remember how God has taken care of them every step of the way to this moment. That when the water was bitter, he made it sweet again. I mean, it's just been about a month. And here they are now. Here they are in this new reality. And they are questioning, is God really who he says he is? Now, this would not have been a crazy thought. This would not have been even really that bad of a question. They were beginning to doubt. And they were maybe even whiny a little and wondering why they deserved this. See, in the ancient world, when something bad happened to you, it must have angered the gods. There had to be a reason. It didn't just happen. So what did you do? What did we do to get to this place? I mean, if you fast forward a little bit into the story in Job 2:9, Job's wife comes to Job and basically says this in chapter 2, verse 9. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." And Job had lost everything. He had lost his family. He had lost his home. He had lost his livelihood. He had lost basically everything. And his wife, his closest individual in his life, says to him, basically just says, "You've really ticked God off. There's nothing left you can do to restore the relationship between you and God. He is so angry. He's done all this. So basically, you should just vent to God, blame him, and curse him and die." Now, this isn't just totally crazy because you fast forward about 2,000 years and you see the same thing happen in John chapter 9. Jesus and his disciples are walking along. Verse 1 of John 9 says this, "And he went along, he saw a blind man from birth, and his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" And so for the day, that was a fair question. If something tragic had happened, there had to be a reason. So who sinned? In other words, who made God mad? Who ticked God off? I mean, surely God wouldn't do that to someone that was undeserving. Surely if you woke up and you had that type of issue in your life, or you were now afflicted with a disease, if you were unable to walk, unable to talk, unable to sing, unable to speak, if you were blind, if you were deaf, there had to be a reason. See, we get stuck in this, that we assume anything out of what we believe and think to be normal must be wrong. Anything that's out of our normal, what we perceive to be normal, must be wrong. We must have made God mad. I mean, in the pandemic, we've heard it all, right? That we of the world, you finally did it. You have finally pushed God over the edge, and he is striking down with his anger. Happens all around us. We feel compelled it's got to be somebody's fault. And we usually run that blame up the hierarchy. If it's going to be bad, it must be someone's fault. And someone really made the big guy angry. Somebody really made God angry. Somebody really ticked him off this time. This pandemic, he never saw this coming, and wow, look what he did. Now, in your home or your work, take a few moments and discuss this question with your family. Get in the chat room with our hostess and our campus pastor. It says, why do we assume God is mad at us or he isn't paying attention when something goes wrong in our life? So we're going to pick up in Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. And this is what it says. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we had set around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve the entire assembly to death. So we're about a month out from the journey through the Red Sea. And the Israelites, they've lived a lot of life the last few months. They've witnessed so much, even all the way back to the plagues. And their lives are very different. Their rhythms are very different from their slavery days in Egypt. What's odd to me is they're not appearing to be excited at all about what God's done for them. They're not really celebrating everything that's taken place. It's a more of a drama-filled approach. Basically, in verse 3, they say, why didn't God just kill us in Egypt? And Moses takes the grumblings or the whiny approach to him. And he takes that approach right to God, and he says, this is what the Israelites are saying, and what do we do with this? And God responds in verse 12. I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with bread. And then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, the flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. So once again, God steps up in a very real way. He provides bread, which if you read all of this chapter and the story, it's called manna, and he provides a meat, quail. And he's making sure that their basic needs are being met at all times. He took care of them. He's doing everything he can to make them whole as a nation. That they're no longer slaves. They no longer have to live like that. They are now free with choice. But the question is, why did they need food? Why do they need food? Now, I understand their basic needs. We need food, we need water to survive. I get that. I'm not questioning that. But why did they need food a month in? They were just a little over a month. And why did they already run out? See, there's a fear of not having enough, and that is powerful. Greed makes us unwise. And the Israelites' issue of fear of not having enough created this greed because they wanted more. If we back up to Exodus chapter 12, verse 30, you catch this. It says, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, up, leave my people. He was telling them, get out. You and the Israelites, go, worship the Lord you have requested. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go, and also bless me. See, they had food. They had flocks. They had herds. They could have taken care of themselves. But they needed more. They needed more. Or maybe they just wanted more. Instead of being thankful for how God had provided, they lived like today was their last day and they would never be enough. And they lived in this fear. They lived in this unbelievable fear. Like God had left them and abandoned them. And from the very beginning, he had walked with them, providing for them. But God does not waste this opportunity to teach a lesson. See, slaves never own their own time. Their 24 hours are spent however the master desires. You work all the time, you serve all the time, you are used all the time. So slaves don't get to choose what they do for their 24 hours. 7 days a week, 12 months a year, you are owned. And God takes this food request as an opportunity to teach about time. Almost like he says, you do what you want to do for 6 days. You have to work. If you don't work, you don't eat. But you got to do whatever you want for these 6 days. You can work, play, whatever. But on the seventh day, you rest. This is honoring to God. See, it's also not just about the rest. It's also about creating trust. That God needed the Israelites to understand, I'm going to keep providing for you. You're not going to do this all on your own. You've got to let me be God, and I will provide for you. Almost like to say, when this week comes to an end, I have met all your needs. Now take a break, rest, worship me, because everything that's happened, and when the beginning of the week happens again, I'm still going to be there. That you need to trust me to get you through this week. You got to trust me to get you through this week. Verse 16 says this is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take in an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much more, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, and they kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow's to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want, boil what you want to boil, save whatever is left, and keep it until morning. And an omer was about 10 cups, a little less than 10 cups. It was plenty for the day. And God is making sure that everybody understands, that he wanted them to understand, that he is going to provide all of their needs. This life lesson is hard to learn. New rhythms, new rituals, and it is hard to believe that God's really going to meet your needs. Israel struggled to understand that all along. If you fast forward about 800 years from this moment, the prophet Isaiah talks to Israel at another time in their life when they are slaves in Babylon. They've been a slave in Babylon for about 70 years, and they feel neglected again, abused, forgotten. And the Israelites are kind of crying out. And Isaiah takes these words from the Lord, and he says this in Isaiah 43, verse 1. He says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name, and you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. They will not sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior." Isaiah goes on in verse 18, he says this, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." I don't know how you feel about things. Maybe you don't feel like nothing's really changed a whole lot, but some of you are feeling like since March, our world has gotten turned upside down. That maybe you feel like you're in a little bit of a wilderness or a wasteland. But what we have found to be true is the God that provided manna and quail, the God that provided a sea that would part, the God that provided water. Even though it wasn't what we wanted at first, he made it right for us. That he provided light and he provided a cloud to lead us. He has provided all along for Israel. He has provided all along for the Israelites, and he does the same for you and I, that he comes to us wherever you and I are at right now. If you see this wilderness, you see this wasteland, then maybe you feel a little helpless. Maybe you feel a little hopeless. That God is able to spread a table, a banquet table out in the wilderness. It's in this moment when he spreads this table out in the wilderness that he says, you just got to trust. You got to obey. You need to be thankful. That our needs, your needs, my needs will be marvelously supplied. See, it doesn't take Israel long to forget the source. Israel struggles to remember, and they say things like, "My life would have been better if I had never followed you." My life would not have been better that way. That when Israel says, "You should have just killed us in Egypt. Why bring us out here?" They were just really saying, "You should have just killed me. I was better off without you." But we all know that almost everything worthwhile is hard. It's got some challenge, especially if the destination is called Promised Land. It's going to have work involved. See, God had this explicit purpose of what he was doing with the Israelites. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 16, he says, "He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you, so in the end it might go well with you." See, when you and I enter in the wildernesses of our life, when we enter into the wastelands, we are stripped away from all the devices, all the things that would say, "I did this on my own," that I am self-sufficient. We begin to look at it differently. See, when everything's going great, it's hard to give God credit. It's when we're in the wasteland, it's when we're in the wilderness that we can become thankful for what God's merciful provisions have been, the way he has stepped in our lives. So we got to see things just a little different. We got to begin to see it the way he intended for us to see it. That God comes along and partners with us in our life. And he says, "I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to take every step with you." During this pandemic, there has been all kinds of things that have been said. All kinds of statements that have been said on God's behalf. There's been statements that have made from really good people. And I don't believe they meant harm. I don't believe they meant to cause problems. But what I want to get us to look at is this pandemic is here now, but it will go away. But make no doubt, there will be other things. Other things in our lives will step up. Some of you may be thinking the pandemic hasn't been that big of a deal. I mean, it hadn't been that hard. I've been battling cancer for 10 years. I lost my spouse 25 years ago. Some of you may be saying, I had to do a funeral for my child. You want to talk about a wilderness and a wasteland. Some of you have been saying, I've been unemployed for so long. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent or my mortgage. Maybe some are just saying, what are you talking about? Well, what I want to encourage you today is that when you read these passages, to trust that God is doing a new thing, that I'm making a way in the wilderness, I'm making a stream in the wasteland, that He will provide for us, that He will provide. From Isaiah to the birth of Jesus, we see about 2,000 years. And Jesus comes along with a new covenant, with a new manna. And He says, I am the bread of life. John 6:35, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never, ever be thirsty. See, as we gather here today, as we gather wherever you're at, if you're at home, you're at work, and you're in your car today, as we gather because it's always been about what God has provided, not what we've done, not what we thought we could do or whatever wherewithal we may have even had. It's about what He was providing for us. And as God has made a way in this story, and the way in the wilderness and a way in the wasteland, He has provided manna in the beginning days. He told them at the exile of Babylon that I am here with you and I'm bringing you a stream in the wasteland. And then He sends His Son. He sends His Son, Jesus, to spend 30 plus years with the first generation of the church. And He says, I will be your new manna. And I will be all that will ever need to be provided. That I have you, I've got you, I choose you, and I love you. Now, as we sing today, as we come back out to sing this song, that you hopefully have gathered your elements for communion, take them, get them ready. And as we come tonight, as we come in this time that we sing, that we will do the elements, we'll take the elements together. As we are offered this new bread, this new covenant, this new way to live in the wilderness.